We are now one day away from the Seattle expansion draft, so today it is time to release to you guys my mock draft. I didn't upload yesterday because I spent most of the day actually working on this. I don't want to waste too much of your guys' time because this is going to be a long video. A lot of work went into this, so I guess the few things I'll say before we get started, be sure to leave a like on the video if you did enjoy. That would be greatly appreciated, and remember, this is just for fun. You don't have to agree with all of my picks. I don't expect to get all of these predictions correct, and also be sure to get down there in the comment section down below and let me know what your team would look like if you were the general manager of Seattle. Starting off, going in alphabetical order, we have the Anaheim Ducks, and my selection is defenseman Hayden Fleury, still relatively young, 25 years old. He was a former top draft pick back in the 2014 draft, and although he was drafted 7 years ago now, he's still really yet to take on a big role at the NHL level. Obviously playing in Carolina, they have a stacked blue line, so he played heavily sheltered minutes in the games he did get into. We'll get to see him come out of his shell a little bit in the brief stint he spent with the Ducks after the trade deadline. His counting stats definitely don't jump off the sheet at you, but I think it's a good sign he's posted pretty solid analytics throughout his career so far, so I would say for Seattle this is a guy worth taking a chance on. Moving on to the Arizona Coyotes, slim pickings when it comes to the list of players to choose from them, but I'm definitely going to go with right winger Christian Fischer. Very cheap, just a cap hit of $1 million, and he's going to be an RFA at the end of that contract, which is up at the end of next season. Very good defensive forward. I like him on the penalty kill as well. Didn't do much offensively this past season, only 3 goals in 52 games, but this is a player who had a 15-goal season back in 2017-18, so if he can get back to scoring at that level while still being very effective defensively, I think he could be a great bottom 6 forward for the Kraken. The Boston Bruins, they have a lot of intriguing options, but I'm going to go with a guy I've liked for a while going back to his early days with the Ducks, and that is Ondrej Kase. He is currently an RFA, so he needs a new contract, so there's that obstacle for Seattle. This is a guy who is sneaky good offensively. On the screen I have his 2019-20 stats showing because he only played 3 games this past season. He was injured for like the whole year, and I would say that's definitely the one knock on Ondrej Kase. Although he's still a relatively young player, he has dealt with his fair share of injuries in his career thus far, but he has had a 20-goal season. He has also had a season in which he scored at above a 25-goal pace. If he's healthy, I really like him as a second-line winger option for Seattle. The Buffalo Sabres, to me, there is really no appealing options. As you can see, I went with Jake McCabe, who's actually currently a UFA, and I'm generally against, an expansion team picking a UFA. I feel like it's a waste of a pick because they could just leave in free agency, but I honestly feel like that's going to happen with the Sabres' choice here. I feel like Seattle's just going to take one of their unrestricted free agents and then not sign them. The Calgary Flames, I'm doing it. I'm taking their captain, defenseman Mark Giordano. Sure, he's probably not worth that $6.875 million cap hit at this point in his career, but let's not act like he's some washed up bum that can't play anymore. It's pretty crazy to think that he's only a couple of seasons removed from winning the Norris Trophy. He's still a solid defenseman. I think this is a guy Seattle can market as, one of the faces of the franchise. He's also a guy that I think can come in, be a good locker room presence, a veteran leader for some of the younger defensemen on the team, like a Hayden Fleury, who we already talked about, and like some of the other defensemen I'm going to talk about later in the video. And if it doesn't work out, well, it's not that big of a deal because he only has 1 year left on his contract. To me, this is a no-brainer of a pick. Speaking of one of those young defensemen that Giordano can mentor, from the Carolina Hurricanes, I'm definitely going to go with 23-year-old defenseman Jake Bean. He was a top 10 pick in the 2016 draft, and similar to what I said about Hayden Fleury, given the fact that Jake Bean has been a member of the Carolina Hurricanes, who have an absolutely stacked blue line, he's yet to really take on a big role at the NHL level. This past season was his first real full season in the NHL. He played 42 games. He has his defensive deficiencies for sure, but I really like his upside as an offensive defenseman, a guy that can quarterback your power play. And you might be thinking, well, for a guy that's not very good defensively, only 12 points in 42 games isn't all that impressive, and yeah, I guess that's true, but you gotta think those were in very, very limited minutes. I think if he gets more of an opportunity in Seattle, this is a defenseman who can give you maybe a 40-45 point season. From the Blackhawks, not a whole lot to choose from here. I thought about going with Adam Gaudette, but in the end, I'm going with restricted free agent defenseman Nikita Zadorov. I'm not a huge fan of Zadorov. He's alright defensively. He's a very physical guy. He's usually good for one extremely big hit a game, which is always fun. When we take a look at some line projections at the end of the video, he's not even really a guy I think that would be in my top 6 defense, just based off of some of the other picks that I made. I just thought he was the best option from Chicago, just from a pure value standpoint. He's a guy that if Seattle picked, I think they'd look to flip him pretty quickly. From the Colorado Avalanche, to me this came down to JT Compher and Jonas Donskoy, and as you can see, I did decide to go with Jonas Donskoy, who is the older player, but at $3.9 million, I just think that's great value for the type of player Donskoy is and what he brings to the table. Scored at a really good pace this past season, the best of his career offensively. I think he'd be a really solid option for Seattle as, one of their top 6 wingers on opening night. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm going with Max Domi. I don't really feel confident in this pick anymore. Steve Dangle on his podcast said that he heard there's no chance that Seattle drafts Max Domi, and Steve Dangle is definitely no insider, but I feel like he just wouldn't, pull that out of thin air. I feel like there's definitely some weight to that. I'm not changing my pick though. I still feel confident that Seattle should take Max Domi. I know he just had a very disappointing season offensively, and that $5.3 million cap hit is a little bit rich, but this is a guy who's 2 seasons removed from putting up 70 plus points with Montreal. He can play the center position. He's only 26. Now, if there was a lot of term left on Max Domi's deal, then I'd probably go a different route here, but there's only 1 year left. What's the worst that could happen? Moving on to Dallas, Ben Bishop was tempting, obviously, really good resume, but there's health concerns there. He's pushing 35, so I'm staying away. I decided to go with centerman Tanner Kiro. He's 28 years old. Actually played relatively well this past season for the Stars, had 10 points in 39 games. And just from a pure value standpoint, I like him as a depth centerman, maybe a guy that's not in the lineup every night, but at $750K through the 2022-23 season, I feel like you can't go wrong. The Red Wings, it's going to be Troy Stecher, and that makes me sad. In my opinion, Stecher was Detroit's best defenseman this past season. I mean, what's not to love about Troy Stecher? He had really good analytics this past season on a Red Wings team that was not good, and also you have to take into account that Troy Stecher played with Mark Stahl for the majority of the season. Troy Stecher also shoots right shooting defensemen are definitely a commodity. He's only 27 years old and he makes under $2 million. I think this is a no-brainer of a pick for Seattle. The Edmonton Oilers going with a pretty inexperienced younger player here in Tyler Benson. He's 23 years old, only has 7 NHL games to his name, but this is a player who has dominated the American Hockey League. He had 66 points back in 18-19. He had 36 points in 36 games this past season. If I'm Seattle, I definitely think Tyler Benson's worth a shot, especially when you look at some of the other players that are available from Edmonton. Not really too many appealing options. The Florida Panthers, this one isn't really a prediction. It's all but confirmed at this point. They are going to select Chris Driedger and sign him to an extension. I believe Elliot Friedman reported that the extension is 3 years with a $3.5 million cap hit. I would say there's a little bit of risk involved there from Seattle, considering Driedger has only played 41 NHL games. However, in those 41 games, he has looked fantastic. Has a .926 career save percentage, great advanced analytics as well, only 27 years old. To me, this is definitely a risk well worth taking for the Kraken. I really struggled with the Kings. I decided in the end to go with Carl Grundstrom. He makes $725K and is signed through this upcoming season. He's going to be an RFA at the end of that deal, of course. Is there really a whole lot there with Grundstrom? A whole lot of potential? I don't really know. To me, this is just one of those picks where you're taking a stab at a once highly touted prospect to see if maybe there's some untapped potential there. The Minnesota Wild, for me, this was an easy pick. I like Carson Soucy, but I'm definitely going with goaltender Kaapo Kähkönen. To me, you just can't pass up on the opportunity to get a 24-year-old goaltender who has put up as good of results as Kähkönen has in the small sample size we have seen from him at the NHL level. Makes only $725K, is signed through next season, and of course will be an RFA at the end of it. To me, Kähkönen has all the potential in the world, maybe not to be a star level goaltender, but to be an above average starter for sure. I think that's definitely what's in the cards for his future. The Montreal Canadiens, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take Carey Price. Don't get me wrong, I want them to just because I love chaos, but the contract, his age, the uncertainty when it comes to his health, I just don't think they're going to do it. So I think Cale Fleury would be a pretty solid pick. Younger defenseman, he was a 3rd round pick by the Habs in 2017, has played 41 games in his NHL career, and all of those actually came in the 2019-20 season. This past season, he was in the American Hockey League. I really don't think he has the upside to be, a top pairing defenseman. If he did, I feel like he'd be protected by Montreal, but at the very least, I do feel like this is a guy who will develop into an NHL caliber defenseman if he isn't one already. The Nashville Predators, this was a very easy pick for me. I'm going with Calle Jarnkrok. He's one of my favorite role players in the NHL. What's not to like about him? He's a fantastic defensive forward. On top of that, he can get you 15 goals, 30, 35 points in a season. I think there's a ton of value in a player like that. He only makes $2 million. He only has 1 year left in his contract, so if Seattle isn't good, maybe they're out of the playoff race at the deadline, this is a guy who I think would be a very, very valuable trade piece at the deadline. The Devils, I went with Will Butcher. I don't really like a lot of the options here. I'm not taking that Andreas Janssen contract on if I'm Seattle. To me, Will Butcher is the type of player you bring on to try to rebuild, maybe juice up his numbers a little bit, and then flip him at the deadline or something like that, because he is a player with only 1 year left in his contract. Since coming in hot in his rookie season, putting up a good amount of points, I feel like he's slowly entering the territory that players like Eric Gustafsson and Shane Gostisbehere are in. The Islanders, I'm going with Josh Bailey. I think Jordan Eberle would be a really good pick here too, but I'm just going to go with Bailey because, he makes $500K less, I guess. Still can't get over the fact that Lamoriello protected Clutterbuck and Martin over Eberle and Bailey, but hey, to each their own. I'm sure Seattle's happy about it. Josh Bailey's just a real solid top 6 two-way winger. He's basically a lock every season to score close to a 15-goal, 50-point pace. I think a $5 million cap hit is pretty fair for a player like Josh Bailey, and he's locked up up through the 2023-24 season as well, which I think is just the right amount of term for a player his age. The Rangers, I'm definitely going to select winger Julien Gauthier. He's a guy I've been a fan of for a while, or at least maybe not a fan of, but been intrigued by. I think he is a really good combination of size, speed, and skill. I mean, he's 6'4", like almost 230 pounds, and he's a quick player, good hands. He just has to put it all together. We've seen him put up really good numbers at the American Hockey League level, just hasn't translated to the NHL. I think if he can put all these tools together, he could be a hidden gem from this draft. The Ottawa Senators, defenseman Josh Brown, I guess, he only makes $1.2 million. He's in the final year of his contract. I looked long and hard at Chris Tierney, but I just couldn't justify taking on that cap hit when on my mock draft team, I already think it's pretty rich down the center position, so I decided to stay away from him. I think Josh Brown would be a fine depth defenseman for Seattle, and if they don't want him, I think he'd be a very tradable player as well. From the Philadelphia Flyers, I'm taking on one of the pretty big contracts here. I'm going with James Van Riemsdyk. He is 32 years old and makes $7 million through the 2022-23 season, but man, did he ever just have a fantastic season. To me, he could bring to Seattle in their first season what James Neal brought to Vegas in their first season. JVR is still a big offensive threat. He's definitely not a defensive liability. He's a guy who can bring a lot of value to your power play as well as a net front player. So I have JVR as a top line winger on my mock drafted team. If the contract even had 3 years left, I definitely would have stayed away, but the fact there's only 2 seasons left, I don't think it's a huge risk. The Pittsburgh Penguins have a lot of interesting options. I decided to go with 26-year-old centerman Zach Aston Reese. He is currently a restricted free agent, so Seattle would have to sign him to a new deal. Zach Aston Reese is arguably one of the best defensive centermen in the league. I really like him in a third, fourth line shutdown centerman role. Doesn't bring a whole lot to the table offensively, but I feel like with his skill set and the way he plays, he doesn't really have to. This is a guy that I think any team would love to have in their bottom 6, and you need players like Aston Reese who just play their role perfectly, so I think he'd be a great choice by Seattle. Slim pickings from the San Jose Sharks. My choice is 24-year-old centerman Dylan Gambrell. He's played a good amount of games for the Sharks over the past 2 combined seasons. I would say this past season, with all the injuries they had, they kind of overplayed him a little bit. His results were okay. I don't know if there's a ton of potential there with Dylan Gambrell, but I just like the fact that he is a cheap cap hit, and at the end of his deal, he's an RFA. I think Seattle can find some value there. The St. Louis Blues, I'm going with 24-year-old defenseman Vince Dunn. I know the popular choice here is Vladimir Tarasenko, and there's rumors that they're going to take Tarasenko, but he's never going to play a game for Seattle. They're just going to flip him immediately and retain some money from his contract, and I think that would be a pretty good option as well. They'd definitely get some value there, but if I were Seattle, I just really love the opportunity to select a young defenseman who's already a proven top 4 defenseman, very good defensive analytics, and he has a little bit of offensive upside as well. He had 20 points in 43 games this past season, had a 35-point season back in 2018-19. To me, the idea of Vince Dunn playing on a top pairing with Mark Giordano, that just really intrigues me, so he's going to be my pick from St. Louis. The Tampa Bay Lightning, for me, it is without a doubt Yanni Gourde, and there is so many other options, Killorn, Palat, younger players like Cal Foote, but I just think this should almost be a no-brainer taking Yanni Gourde. I have him as the first-line center for my team. You might be thinking, well, it'll be hard for him to go from playing third-line center to first-line center, and that's definitely true, but you look at the minutes he played and the competition he played against, Tampa Bay usually rolled out that Yanni Gourde line against other teams' top lines, so I think he should have no problem transitioning to being a number 1 center. I think he'd do great in a role where he plays, 18, 19 minutes a night. Yanni Gourde just does a little bit of everything. He's great offensively, he's great defensively, he's probably one of the best forecheckers in the league, just an absolute nuisance to play against, and I think a cap hit of a little under $5.2 million for a player like that is very fair, and he's locked up for the foreseeable future as well. He signed through the 2024-25 season. To me, this is a guy who can be, a cornerstone player for Seattle in their first 4 or 5 seasons, and I know there's the crowd of people that say, don't help out Tampa Bay, don't take one of their bigger contracts. That is what they want you to do, but I just think this is too good of an opportunity to pass up, and given how valuable Yanni Gourde is to the Lightning, I can honestly see a scenario where they give something to the Seattle Kraken in order for them to not take Yanni Gourde and go with a guy like Palat or Alex Killorn. The Toronto Maple Leafs, really only 2 options here. You're going with Jared McCann or Alex Kerfoot, and for me, this is a no-brainer. If I'm Seattle, I'm taking Jared McCann. He's younger than Kerfoot, he makes less money than Kerfoot. McCann is a guy who can play on the wing, but also played a lot of center this past season with the Penguins. He's a very solid 2-way player, career highs this past season in goals per game, assists per game, points per game. I just love what Jared McCann brings to the table, and it's a bonus that at the end of his contract, he's an RFA. It's up at the end of next season. The Vancouver Canucks are definitely going with prospect Cole Lind. I thought about Jake Virtanen, but I just don't think that's a very good idea. Cole Lind has only played 7 games with the Canucks. They all came this past season. He's a guy who's put up very good results in the American Hockey League in each of the past 2 seasons. I just think he'd be a really nice player for Seattle to have in their system. I think he's got good upside. The Washington Capitals, I was so close to going with Brendan Dillon, but I'm going with my third goaltender, Vitek Vanacek. Had a really strong rookie season with the Washington Capitals, 21-10-4, 908 save percentage, a 2.69 goals against. Really held down the fort early on in the season when Samsonov was out. To me, going with him, it's kind of the same reason as to why I said they should take Kaapo Kähkönen. He's a younger goaltender, and in the small sample size of games we've seen him play, he's looked very good, so I think that's just too valuable to pass up. And now for my final pick of the video from the Winnipeg Jets. I know a lot of people are going with Dylan DeMello on their mock drafts, but I'm actually going to go with 25-year-old forward Mason Appleton. He can play both the center position and the wing. This past season, he had career highs across the board, 12 goals, 13 assists, 25 points in just 56 games. Could have pushed the 20 goal mark if it were a full 82 game season. This is a guy who I definitely think can be year in, year out, like an energizer player on the third line who can chip in 15 goals, maybe 40 points. And one of my favorite things about Mason Appleton, he makes $900K this upcoming season, and at the end of the deal will be an RFA, so I think he'd be a really good get for Seattle. So here's what the roster looks like, all put into cap friendly. As you can see here, $28.8 million in projected cap space. I feel like I did a pretty good job of preserving cap space. I know that's something Ron Francis said he definitely prioritizes. However, this cap space doesn't take into account that there has to be 4 RFA forwards signed and also 4 RFA defensemen, and it doesn't take into account Chris Drieger's $3.5 million cap hit either, so that number would definitely probably come down closer to $15 million after all those contracts were done, but that's still a good amount of cap space for sure. So the final roster: James Van Riemsdyk, Max Domi, Yanni Gourde, Josh Bailey, Jonas Donskoy, McCann, Yarncroke, Gambrell, Christian Fischer, Mason Appleton, Julian Gauthier, Tanner Kiro, Carl Grunstrom, Zach Aston Reese, Andre Kasha, Tyler Benson, and Cole Lind. Those are the forwards. And then on defense, we get Mark Giordano, Will Butcher, Troy Stetcher, Hayden Fleury, Josh Brown, Cale Fleury, Jake Bean, Jake McCabe, who I just don't really view as a part of the team. I just wouldn't sign him. Nikita Zadorov, Vince Dunn, and then in goal, Kaapo Kähkönen, Vitek Vanacek, and Chris Drieger. And now finally, to look at some potential line combinations, I put my team into JFresh Hockey's Seattle roster builder using WAR, or wins above replacement. It's a really fun tool to use, and as you can see here with my team in the roster builder, projected standings points is 103, so I think I did a pretty decent job. I'm really digging the look of this third line: McCann, Yarncroke, and Appleton. I feel like that line has a lot of skill, speed, and would just be annoying to play against. I think the defense looks really strong, headlined by Giordano and Dunn, Bean, Stetcher, Fleury. Again, not a huge fan of Zadorov, but I feel like he'd be fine in a bottom pairing role. And then of course in goal, Chris Drieger and Kaapo Kähkönen, and I also took Vitek Vanacek, who I feel like would probably be the third goaltender, or maybe be someone Seattle would look to flip and get some value for. I'm not sure. So that is going to do it for my 2021 Seattle Kraken expansion mock draft. Again, like I said at the start of the video, a lot of time, a lot of effort went into preparing all the graphics and stuff like this for this video, so if you did enjoy, a like would go a long way. I'd really appreciate it. And just as a heads up, some other videos you can look out for in the next couple of days. After the expansion draft, I will be posting my review, going over the selections that Seattle made, what their lineup could look like on opening night, all the trades that happened, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of side deals. And also, I'm not sure if this will come before or after my expansion draft review, I will have a mock draft up for the NHL entry draft as well.